Welcome to this deep dive into an astounding survival saga. I mean, we're looking at one of the most incredible stories in recorded human history. We're going to unpack a mystery that honestly defies logic, completely defies belief, and literally pushes the boundaries of human endurance. We're mapping out exactly what happened, step by step, using the historical record to guide us. So let's get right into it. Just take a second to process the sheer impossibility of this question. How did 134 people vanish without a trace into the notoriously deadly zone of the Bermuda Triangle, a place literally synonymous with doom, only to return from the dead an unbelievable 9 years later? Like, how did they survive? What on earth did they endure out there?
Okay, let's dive into this, starting with Chapter 1, Into the Bermuda Triangle. To really ground this mystery, we've got to look at the hard facts. Picture this. It's the fateful night of December 27th, 1948. A massive Douglas DC-3 passenger aircraft takes off. Now, it was flying what should have been a super brief, totally routine route from Miami, heading further into Florida. A bit oddly specific, sure, but on board were 125 passengers and a crew of 9. That's 134 total souls. At 8,300 feet, everything was perfectly peaceful. They're cruising along. Then, at exactly 8:13 p.m., Captain Robert Miller reports a seemingly minor technical issue to San Juan Air Traffic Control. But then, literally 10 seconds after that transmission, the plane completely vanished from the radar. It had flown directly into the dead center of the Bermuda Triangle and was swallowed up by a terrifying, unimaginable vortex. A massive storm just gripped the aircraft like a toy. All the electronics died. The compass completely failed. The plane was totally blind, plunging from the sky toward a totally uncharted, untouched island below. And then, an absolute miracle. Instead of slamming into the ground, the plane crashed directly into a giant, ancient tree. Its hundreds of thick branches acted like a massive safety net, catching the falling metal and saving everyone inside from instant death.
To understand how they actually survived this, we're going to follow this timeline. It maps out their grueling descent from civilized passengers to desperate castaways, and then their eventual resurgence. I really want you to pay close attention to how this desperate situation slowly evolved into a permanent nightmare over these specific years. We start with this unbelievable number, 134. Every single person survived the initial impact. No way, right? Inside that mangled cabin, there was absolute chaos, screams, panic. But Captain Robert Miller, despite suffering a severe head wound from hitting a panel, he immediately took charge. He stepped up, calmed the panic, while Dr. Evelyn Reed, who happened to be a retired Army doctor on board, wasted absolutely no time treating the 10 passengers who were severely injured. Everyone was in shock, for sure. But hey, they were alive. Section 2. Surviving the Unknown Island. So stepping out of the wreckage, the grim reality of this unknown island set in almost immediately. There was no fresh water, no rivers, no springs, nothing. Their only hope was relying entirely on capturing rainwater. And hunger hit hard. Desperate to find food in the jungle, a middle-aged man ate an unknown fruit. Tragically, he died in absolute agony just hours later. It was the island's first casualty, and a terrifying warning to everyone else. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how methodically they turned the remaining plane debris into an absolute lifeline. Captain Miller split them into groups. They salvaged the plane for shelter materials. Get this. A teenage boy used the lenses of his eyeglasses to focus the sun's rays and start their very first fire. They rubbed plane metal against island stones to forge knives and spears. And incredibly, learning from a professional hunter who just happened to be on the flight, they figured out how to trap and hunt the aggressive wild boars roaming the island. Meanwhile, the outside world was desperately searching for them. The U.S. government launched a historic $45 million search operation. They scoured the Atlantic, but after 6 months, they found absolutely nothing. The search was officially called off, and all 134 people were declared dead. You can imagine the devastating psychological blow this was for the survivors, especially considering they had built these massive help signs on the beach using coconut trunks, and their engineer, Arthur Vance, had actually managed to send out 1 weak radio transmission before the battery completely died. But nobody heard it. As the months dragged on, the island really took its toll, and our number drops to 114. Illness, despair, and just the sheer mental weight of isolation claimed lives. In a really desperate move, 5 youths took a makeshift raft out into the ocean while everyone slept. They simply vanished, never to be seen again.
The remaining survivors began the grim task of burying their dead, finding their only real solace by gathering around the fire at night, singing songs, and sharing stories of their old lives.
Section 3. Society, Despair, and Division.
This brings us to the long, grueling middle phase of their isolation, where humanity attempted to basically rebuild itself from scratch. Over the next few years, they hit some incredible milestones. At year 1.5, the birth of a healthy baby boy brought a massive surge of hope to the camp. By year 2, they had established small-scale farming and figured out new fishing techniques. But that urge to return to civilization, it never died. So by year 5, engineer Arthur Vance led the camp's most ambitious project yet, constructing a massive, sturdy boat using plain wreckage, wood, and vines.
But the island wasn't ready to let them go just yet. They put their 25 strongest, most capable individuals on that boat to go get help. But just miles off the coast, the weather violently turned. A severe storm and massive waves flipped the boat entirely. While a few managed to swim back to shore, 16 people drowned. It was an absolute disaster that completely shattered the camp's morale.
And so, the human cost becomes staggering, dropping to 98. Visually, that number just hits you, right? Between the illnesses, the youths who vanished on the raft, and that devastating boat tragedy. A total of 36 people were now dead or missing. So the crucial point is that this unbelievable loss fundamentally fractured the group. Natural resources were dwindling, food was causing major tension, and then they made a terrifying discovery. An exploration party found ancient ruins and a human skeleton holding a rusted piece of old plane metal. Yeah, you heard that right. This sparked massive fears that the island was actually cursed. Because of this, they split into two bitter factions. Captain Miller led the group that stubbornly refused to give up on escaping. But the other faction, utterly despairing, believed any attempt to leave only brought death, arguing they should just resign themselves to living on the island permanently.
By year 7, the situation had deteriorated even further. Starvation, disease, and the deep emotional tension between the factions claimed 16 more lives. They were down to just 82 people, completely devoid of hope, essentially just waiting for the end.
Section 4, Nature's Wrath and a Miracle. But the island still wasn't done with them. Things somehow managed to get even worse. In their 8th year, a massive cyclone ripped through the island. Torrential rain and violent winds totally destroyed their shelters and the small crops they had spent literally years cultivating. Everything was in ruins. And just as they were sitting out in the open, freezing, wondering if this was finally the end, a violent, earth-shattering earthquake struck weeks later. The ground practically split open, massive trees were uprooted. It truly felt like the final nail in their coffin. And this brilliantly illustrates the incredible irony of their situation. The very disaster that terrorized them actually unearthed their salvation. The massive earthquake shifted the rusted plane wreckage that had been sitting in the exact same spot for 8 years. This shifting suddenly exposed deeply buried wires and radio equipment. Days later, Arthur Vance was inspecting the shifted wreckage. And in a cosmic, almost statistically impossible coincidence, a rare solar flare was impacting Earth's magnetic field right at that very moment.
Section 5. The Final Rescue.
Arthur pressed a switch on the old radio, and to his absolute shock, he heard static. With trembling hands, he quickly connected the remaining wires to the battery, and for the first time in 9 years, the little green light flickered on. With his heart pounding out of his chest, he spoke into the mic. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday, this is flight NC 16002. Is anyone listening? We are alive. We have been stuck on an island for 9 years."
Thousands of miles away, an operator at Miami Air Traffic Control heard the transmission. Initially thinking it was just a sick joke, the operator was stunned into pure silence when Arthur verified the flight registration and the captain's name. The U.S. government immediately mobilized, rapidly restarting the search in the Bermuda Triangle. Back on the island, the survivors kept a massive fire burning day and night to generate thick smoke. And finally, one morning, a survivor spotted a tiny speck on the horizon. It was a U.S. Navy ship. Overwhelming tears and screams of pure joy erupted as the 82 survivors sprinted across the beach toward their rescuers. 82. That is the final count of living souls. 82 people who survived the absolutely impossible. When they stepped off that rescue ship, they returned to families and a world that had mourned them for nearly a decade.
They proved the sheer, unbreakable invincibility of human endurance. This story shook the entire world. It became an absolute legend, eventually immortalized in 1958 by best-selling author James Baldwin in his book Lost in the Echo, the 9-year survival of Flight NC 16002. We've traced the timeline, the staggering tragedies, and the incredible miracles. But I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. As you sit here, right now, what level of willpower does it truly take to look into the abyss, to outlast 9 years of absolute hopelessness, and still refuse to give up?